Story 1. The Locked Drawer. Aaron was 15 the summer his father remarried. It had only been 2 years since his mother died, but the grief still clung to the house like dust that refused to be cleaned away. His father's new wife, Marissa, swept in with smiles and floral dresses, the kind of woman who seemed to shine in daylight. Everyone in town said she was a blessing, a fresh start. Aaron tried to believe that, but the house didn't. From the moment she moved in, the air felt different. Gone was the smell of lavender candles his mother had loved. Marissa filled the rooms with sharp, artificial scents, lemon cleaner, bleach, air fresheners that made Aaron's head ache. She threw out the old living room couch, insisting it was too depressing. She painted over the faded yellow walls with crisp, cold white. Even his mother's wedding china disappeared, replaced by cheap plates she bought at the store. Out with the old, in with the new, she said with a tinkling laugh. But there was one thing she kept. In the study, at the far end of the hall, stood a heavy oak desk. Aaron's father had always hated it. It was massive, scratched, and weighed so much it left dents in the hardwood floor. It had belonged to Aaron's grandfather, then his mother. The surface was darkened with years of polish and ink stains. The drawers stuck when you pulled them, and the brass handles were tarnished green. Aaron assumed Marissa would throw it out, too. But she didn't. When he asked her why, she smiled in that too bright way of hers. This desk has character. It stays. From that day on, the study became off limits. She told Aaron firmly never to go inside. Your father works there, and I need it tidy. Don't touch the desk. Aaron agreed, but unease crawled in his stomach. He noticed the way she lingered in that room. The door closed for hours while his father was at work. Sometimes, when she came out, her eyes looked too wide, her smile too forced, as if she had been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. At night, Aaron swore he heard noises from behind the study door. Scraping sounds. Whispering. He told himself it was just the house settling, or maybe Marissa watching TV too loud. But then came the night when curiosity got the better of him. It was past midnight, rain tapping against the windows. His father had left for a business trip that afternoon, leaving Aaron alone with Marissa. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of wood. Aaron lay in bed, wide awake, when he heard it, an unmistakable sound. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. It was coming from the study. Heart pounding, he slid out of bed and crept down the hall. The door was cracked just enough to see inside. Marissa knelt on the rug, her back straight, hair falling over her shoulders. A single lamp glowed on the desk, casting her face in a sickly yellow light. Her hands were on one of the drawers, the bottom one, the one Aaron had never seen open. She whispered as she worked the lock, words too soft to understand, her lips moving quickly as if repeating a prayer. Finally, with a click, the drawer slid open. Aaron pressed himself to the wall, barely breathing. Inside, he caught glimpses of what lay within. Strands of hair tied with ribbons, small toys with peeling paint, faded photographs of children. Children he didn't recognize. None of them were him. Marissa reached inside and lifted a picture to her chest, rocking slightly, as if soothing herself. Her lips moved faster now, the whispers rising, strange syllables that made Aaron's skin crawl. He backed away before she could notice him, hurrying silently to his room. But sleep never came. All night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of whispering and the slow scrape of a drawer opening and closing. The next morning, Marissa made pancakes as if nothing had happened. She hummed cheerfully, flipping them onto plates, her eyes sparkling. Your father's business trip will be long, she said, sliding a stack toward Aaron. Looks like it's just you and me. Her smile lingered a little too long. Aaron forced a laugh, but he couldn't stop glancing toward the study door. When she wasn't looking, he noticed her hands. The nails were dirty, faint traces of soil under them, as if she had been digging outside in the middle of the night. That evening, he walked past the study. The door was shut tight, but he could hear it, faint voices. Not Marissa's voice, but many. Soft, overlapping, like children speaking in hushed tones. He pressed his ear to the wood. Mommy, one of them whispered. Another voice whimpered, I'm cold. A third, so faint he thought he imagined it, said, Please let me go. Aaron stumbled back, while rising in his throat. He didn't go near the study again that night. But the voices followed him. As he lay in bed, the cries grew louder, as if traveling through the walls. He pulled the blankets over his head, praying for sleep. The days blurred together. His father called once or twice, his voice distant and tired. Marissa always answered the phone before Aaron could, speaking in a sugary tone. When she hung up, she turned to Aaron with that smile that never reached her eyes. But the nights were the worst. Every night, the voices came. Sometimes crying, sometimes whispering, sometimes chanting in a strange rhythm that made his head pound. And always, the sound of that drawer sliding open and closed. One night, Aaron couldn't take it anymore. He waited until the house was dark. Slowly, carefully, he crept toward the study. His hands trembled as he pushed the door open. The desk sat in the center of the room, the lamp still glowing. The bottom drawer was slightly ajar. He forced himself closer. Inside were the objects he had seen before, the hair, the toys, the photographs. But now he noticed something else. Scratches along the inside of the drawer. Tiny, desperate marks, as if small hands had clawed at the wood, trying to get out. And then, beneath the photographs, he saw a piece of paper. His breath caught as he pulled it free. It was a school picture. His mother, when she was a little girl. Her name scrawled in childish handwriting at the bottom. Before he could process what it meant, the drawer slammed shut. Aaron spun around. Marissa stood in the doorway, her smile stretched too wide, her eyes dark. "I told you never to touch the desk," she said softly. "Now you've let them know you can hear them." Behind her, faint voices rose from the desk. Louder now. Dozens of them, crying, pleading, whispering his name. Aaron dropped the photo and ran. That night, he locked his bedroom door and shoved furniture against it. He sat awake until dawn, listening to the voices echo through the house, growing closer, louder, until he swore he felt cold breath on the back of his neck. When his father returned days later, Aaron tried to tell him everything. But his father only frowned. "Don't be ridiculous. You're letting your imagination run wild." Marissa has been wonderful. Marissa stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, smiling at Aaron. Her nails were clean now, her eyes bright, her voice soft as honey. But that night, as Aaron lay in bed, he heard it again, the faint sound of the drawer sliding open. The children's voices calling to him. And Marissa's voice, whispering through the dark. Class begins when the house sleeps. Story 2, The Midnight Lessons. Sophia was 12 when her life shifted in ways she couldn't quite explain. Until then, things had been relatively normal. Her mother had passed away when she was very young, so her memories of her were more like scattered fragments than complete moments. Her father, though often busy with work, had always been attentive, trying to fill that gap in her life with warmth and routine. They weren't perfect, but they were stable. That all changed when her father remarried. Her new stepmother, Evelyn, swept into their home with a quiet elegance. She wasn't cruel, not at first. In fact, she seemed overly polite, smiling sweetly and offering compliments in a voice that was always just a little too soft, a little too measured. She moved through the house as if it had always belonged to her, rearranging furniture, replacing curtains, repainting walls. At first, Sophia thought she was simply trying to make the place feel like her own, but as the weeks passed, she began to notice that Evelyn wasn't just changing the house. She was changing her father too. He became distracted, distant. He was always tired, always working later hours, and when he was home, he seemed to retreat into silence, barely noticing Sophia's unease. It was Evelyn who suggested homeschooling. She'd claimed it was for Sophia's benefit. No more long bus rides. No more mean girls whispering at lockers. No more tired mornings trying to keep up with crowded classrooms. "I'll teach her myself," Evelyn said sweetly. "We'll build a more personal education. She'll thrive under my guidance." Her father agreed too quickly. Sophia didn't get a say. At first, she was almost relieved. It meant staying home. It meant avoiding the daily loneliness of school lunchrooms. But homeschooling with Evelyn wasn't anything like she'd imagined. There were no textbooks, no lesson plans, no math worksheets or spelling quizzes. Instead, the lessons were different. Evelyn would light candles in the living room, drawing the curtains until the daylight dimmed to a muted haze. She would make Sophia sit cross-legged on the rug while she recited strange words, syllables that twisted on the tongue like smoke. "Repeat after me," Evelyn would whisper, her eyes fixed intently on Sophia's face. The words never made sense. They weren't English, weren't Spanish or French, or any language Sophia had ever heard. The sounds were guttural, sharp at times, then flowing and almost melodic. Evelyn made her repeat them until her throat was dry, until the syllables echoed in her skull long after the candles were blown out. When Sophia asked what they meant, Evelyn only smiled. "You'll understand in time," she said. Days blurred into weeks. Each lesson left Sophia with headaches, a faint dizziness that clung to her even as she tried to sleep. Sometimes she dreamed of endless corridors, of doors she couldn't open, of shadows whispering the same strange words her stepmother taught her by day. Then came the night. Sophia woke abruptly, her body stiff, her throat dry. A faint glow flickered across her ceiling. Candlelight. At first, she thought maybe she'd left a light on, but when she turned her head, her heart froze. Evelyn was standing over her bed. Her stepmother's face was serene, but her eyes were locked on Sophia with an intensity that made her chest tighten. In one hand, Evelyn held a candle. In the other, she traced invisible shapes in the air, murmuring those same foreign words Sophia had come to dread. The flame cast shadows that writhed across the walls, twisting in shapes that looked too deliberate to be random. Evelyn's free hand hovered above Sophia's forehead, her finger glowing faintly red in the candlelight. Sophia tried to move, tried to scream, but her body wouldn't obey her. She felt frozen, trapped beneath her own sheets, as if the very air around her was pressing down like a weight. The words filled the room, curling in her ears. She didn't understand them, but somehow she felt them sinking into her skin, seeping into her bones. Her vision blurred. The last thing she remembered was the sensation of something searing against her forehead, like invisible ink burning its way under her skin. Then, blackness. The next morning, she woke with sunlight streaming through the blinds. For a moment, she thought it had been a dream. But when she touched her forehead, she felt it, raised skin, faintly raw. She ran to the mirror and pulled her hair aside. There, half-faded but unmistakable, were strange symbols etched against her flesh. They weren't scratches. They weren't bruises. They were deliberate. She asked her father, trembling, what it meant. He barely looked up from his coffee, sighing. "You must have been dreaming, Sophia. Stress does strange things to kids. Don't worry about it." But dreams didn't leave scars. From that night on, Sophia grew weaker. She would sleep for hours and wake more tired than before. She lost her appetite. Her skin paled. Even her laughter, once light and easy, seemed to drain out of her. She began to feel like a hollow version of herself, walking through days and a days. Every night, she feared waking again to the sight of Evelyn by her bed. And every morning, she felt less and less certain that she hadn't. The marks on her skin would change, faint new lines appearing, old ones fading, like an evolving script being carved into her. She tried to stay awake at night, clutching a flashlight under her covers, forcing her eyes open until they burned. But no matter how hard she fought, sleep always claimed her. And with it came dreams, dreams of standing in circles of candles, chanting with voices she couldn't see, while Evelyn's hand pressed heavy against her head. Her father no longer seemed to notice her at all. He worked longer hours. Sometimes he wouldn't come home for days. When he was home, he was quiet, glassy-eyed, as though Evelyn's presence overshadowed him completely. It became clear to Sophia that she was alone in this. One evening, gathering what little courage she had left, she snuck into Evelyn's room while her stepmother was out tending to the garden. The bedroom smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, the curtains drawn even in daylight. Sophia went straight to the dresser, yanking open drawers until she found a small, locked box. Her heart hammered as she pried it open with a hairpin. Inside were papers, brittle with age. Pages filled with the same strange language she'd been forced to learn. The symbols matched the ones burned into her skin. drawings of circles, diagrams of bodies with marks scrawled across their foreheads and chests, and photographs, grainy, faded, of children. Their eyes were empty, their faces pale. Sophia's stomach lurched. She shoved the papers back just as she heard the creak of the front door. Evelyn's voice floated in. "Sophia?" Panic surged through her. She stuffed the box back into the drawer and bolted, her hands shaking. She locked herself in her room and pressed her back to the door, gasping for breath. That night, she dreamed again. This time, she wasn't in a circle of candles. She was standing in a mirror, staring out at herself. Her reflection didn't move with her. Instead, it smiled. And behind it, Evelyn's face loomed, whispering in that guttural, flowing language. When she woke, the marks on her skin were deeper, darker. Sophia realized then that her stepmother wasn't teaching her lessons at all. She was using her, feeding on her, drawing something out of her piece by piece, night after night. She didn't know how much longer she had before there was nothing left. And when Evelyn came into her room the next morning, smiling sweetly and holding a candle, Sophia finally understood. The midnight lessons weren't lessons. They were a ritual, and she was the offering. Story 3, The Empty Frame. David had never really liked the new house. It wasn't because it was old, though it was, but because it didn't feel like his. He had spent most of his life in the small, cluttered home he and his father had shared before his dad remarried. That place had been cramped, sometimes too loud with the hum of the pipes and the squeaks of old floorboards, but it was familiar. The smell of his mother's perfume still lingered faintly in his old bedroom, even though she'd been gone for years. This new house, Evelyn's house, was different. It was large, unervingly tidy, with polished floors that creaked in strange places and high walls that seemed to swallow sound. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Most of all, there was the hallway. It stretched from the front door all the way to the staircase, a narrow corridor lined with picture frames. Dozens of them, hung with precise symmetry, their gold and oak edges gleaming faintly in the light. But there was one detail David couldn't ignore. Every single one of those frames was empty. The first time he asked about it, Evelyn only smiled. Her smile was wide, too wide, as if it were something she had practiced in the mirror. "I'm just making room for new memories," she said. The words unsettled him. Memories didn't need empty frames. Memories were made, then captured, not waiting like open mouths along a hallway wall. But his father didn't seem to notice or care. "She's just redecorating," his father said one evening over dinner. He barely looked up from his plate, his voice distant. "You'll get used to it." David wasn't sure he wanted to. The weeks that followed passed in uneasy silence. His father worked late, often gone until long after David went to bed. That left him alone with Evelyn, whose sweetness had an edge to it, like a knife hidden beneath silk. She always seemed to watch him closely, too closely, her eyes flicking toward him when she thought he wasn't looking. One night, while brushing his teeth, David caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She wasn't looking at him directly, but rather at the empty space around him, as if seeing something he couldn't. Her lips moved faintly, forming words he didn't hear. When he turned, she was gone. The hallway, though, was the worst. He avoided it when he could, choosing instead to take the back staircase or linger in his room until his father came home. But sometimes he couldn't avoid it. And every time he walked past those frames, he felt it, the prickling sensation of being watched. The glass of the frames gleamed like 1,000 eyes, catching his reflection in fragmented pieces. Then came the night everything changed. His father had called to say he'd be working late again. David had nodded numbly, pretending not to care, but the loneliness pressed heavier that evening. The house seemed too quiet, the air too still. As he passed the hallway on his way to the kitchen, he stopped dead. The frames were no longer empty. His breath caught as he stepped closer, staring. Each frame now held a photograph. Not of Evelyn, not of his father. Of him. There he was, sleeping in his bed, mouth slightly open, hair messy against the pillow. There he was again, sitting at the kitchen table, a spoon half raised to his mouth. Another showed him hunched over his desk, scribbling in his notebook. The angles chilled him. They weren't photos he could have taken himself. They weren't the kind of pictures someone snapped from across the room. These had been taken up close, intimate, from vantage points where someone must have been standing right beside him. His chest tightened. His skin prickled. He stumbled backward, his gaze darting from frame to frame. Dozens of pictures, all of him, in moments of solitude he thought had been private. Panic surged. He spun, running up the stairs to his father's room. He banged on the door, calling out, only to remember, his father wasn't home. He was alone with Evelyn. The thought made his stomach twist. He forced himself to turn back, to see if maybe, just maybe, he had imagined it. The hallway was empty again. The frames were bare. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. And then he saw her. Evelyn stood at the far end of the hallway, her hands folded neatly around a feather duster. She tilted her head, her smile fixed and too wide, her eyes glinting in the low light. "Dusting," she said, her voice soft, sweet. "I like to keep them clean. You never know when the perfect picture might appear." David's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He wanted to ask, to scream, but his throat locked. All he could do was nod, retreating step by step until he reached the safety of his room. That night, he barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the windows made him jolt upright, heart pounding. He pulled the blanket over his head, clutching his phone like a lifeline, waiting for the sound of his father's car in the driveway. When his father finally came home, well past midnight, David nearly ran to him. He wanted to tell him everything. The photographs, the frames, Evelyn's words. But when he saw his father's face, pale and drawn, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, he stopped. His father wouldn't believe him. He barely seemed to see him anymore. Evelyn had woven herself too tightly into his life, into the house, into everything. David was alone. The next day, Evelyn hummed as she dusted the frames again. Her tune was unfamiliar, low and unsettling, winding through the house like smoke. When she caught him watching, she smiled that too wide smile. "Tomorrow," she said softly, almost lovingly, "I'll have the perfect picture." David didn't know what she meant, but the words lodged in his chest like ice. That night, he locked his bedroom door, shoved a chair under the handle, and lay awake with the covers pulled tight. He stared at the shadows on his wall, waiting for the creak of footsteps in the hallway, waiting for the faint click of a camera shutter. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard groaned. He held his breath. In the silence, he could almost hear it, the faintest whisper of a smile forming behind glass. And in that moment, David realized something terrifying. The empty frames weren't waiting for memories. They were waiting for him. For the last, perfect picture.